The wolf featured on the totem poles is the emblem of their clan. Scythian cultures were hierarchical. Each tribe had a leader, and the clans were often regrouped under one king.
Let's go eat? No. Show me.
This is part of a wooden quiver that would have been worn on the left thigh. It's from the ancient Greek classical age. They had leather pouches that contained both the bow and the arrows.
The recurve bow was the preferred weapon for the Scythians. It's small, but powerful. Passerach arrows were mostly made out of bronze. They started using iron much later than their Western Scythian cousins.
According to Herodotus, the Scythians were mounted archers. They were invincible. Their battle strategy was based on the use of highly mobile forces that could pursue the enemy for hours. The populations that inhabited the steppe, and the people that live there today, employ the same combat tactics and rely on mounted archery.
They used short swords and pickaxes. There was no political unity between the Scythian groups, and there were frequent turf wars between the rival tribes. Only the arrival of a common enemy could unite these warrior populations.
Alexandre le Grand, en 331 avant Jésus-Christ.
In 331 BC, in his conquest of the Achaemenid Persian territories, Alexander the Great came up against the Scythian Sakha tribes from Central Asia. He attempted to oust them from their territory. The Macedonians launched an attack. However, the Scythians fought back and defended their region. It was one of the only times that the Macedonians were defeated. Alexander the Great drew back and left the area, having failed to conquer the terrain.
Alexandre est revenu malade de son expédition sans avoir pu ajouter ses territoires à son empire.
These are vertebrae. The poor child, he was so young.
The archaeologists have made an extraordinary discovery in the burial chamber. They have found 2 bodies underneath the collapsed ceiling, one adult and one child. The bodies have been placed on their sides, and they have been buried with weapons as well as other objects. The burial chamber is oriented on an east-west axis, following the sun cycle. This is symbolic of the cycle of birth and death. The most important person is always located at the furthest point south in the tomb. In this case, it is the adult. But why has he been buried with a child?
According to Herodotus, a child was sacrificed when a Scythian prince was buried. The body's not in great condition, so I don't think that we'll be able to tell if he'd had his throat cut. Also, there are a number of ways to kill someone, and it's not always possible to identify the cause of death, even for a pathologist.
The skeleton of the child has been affected by the partial collapse of the burial chamber, but the adult was protected by the wall and has been extremely well preserved. It looks as if it will be possible to perform a forensic analysis. The body is being transferred to the paleontology unit in the Raymond Poincaré Hospital in Garches, just outside of Paris.
The analysis of these remains plays an important part in our research because it gives us an idea about the life of the individual and, in particular, the way in which he died. The permafrost has caused an effect similar to mummification. A type of natural embalming has been caused by dehydration induced by the cold. A grey substance can be found on the surface of the bones, muscles and skin. It's a combination of dried muscle, skin and fat. Anomalies are visible on the upper limbs. It seems to suggest something called rider osteological syndrome. This is directly related to intense cavalry practice and indicates severe osteoarthritis. I have rarely seen such a severe case in a paleopathology unit. This is interesting. Here we can see traumatic injuries that occurred on fresh bones and therefore at the time of death. We can't see any traces of healing, and this means that the injury was the cause of death. It's a clear-cut wound and concentrated on one point. It looks as if it was caused by an arrowhead entry. This causes bleeding in the interior of the skull and in the brain, and a rapid death. There are indications of flesh having been torn off. It looks as if the head was scalped.
Herodotus wrote about the ritual embalming of Scythian leaders. They were scalped, and then their bodies were eviscerated and filled with herbs. This was necessary in winter, when it was impossible to dig graves in the frozen ground. The mummified bodies were stored for several months and presented to ally clans during transhumance. The bodies were then buried in the Surgal Valley, where they lived during the summer months. The first tomb proved to be a remarkable source of discovery. It has now been covered in order to maintain its original appearance. The team has moved on to a nearby tomb that has intrigued them since the start of the excavation. Traditionally, Pazyryk tombs were situated in rows, a few meters apart. Different generations were buried in rows heading from south to north. The second tomb is located further north than the tomb of the man and child. But why do the piles of stones overlap? Does this break from Scythian burial tradition have a special significance? It's proving twice as hard to dig out the second tomb. The archaeologists have been working in Surgal for 4 weeks, and it's imperative that they complete the excavation before weather conditions worsen.
C'est vraiment dur, vraiment dur.
The ground is extremely hard. We're 2,500 meters above sea level, at the highest point of Mongolia, far from the capital. It's always cold here, even during the summer. The conditions are tough.